The Taiping Rebellion. In the mid-19th century, China was consumed by a colossal upheaval. Entire provinces lay in ruins, famine and fire swept the land. By the conflict's end, over 20 million people were dead, one of the deadliest wars in human history. This cataclysm was the Taiping Rebellion, a civil war that nearly toppled an ancient dynasty. It began with the visions of a single man and grew into a struggle of staggering scale. It promised a heavenly kingdom of great peace, but instead unleashed 14 years of chaos and bloodshed. To understand how such a tragedy unfolded, we must begin with that man and the troubled world he lived in. In the 1840s, the Qing dynasty ruled China. The Qing emperors, themselves foreigners from the Manchu people, had governed for 2 centuries, presiding over a vast empire. But beneath the imperial splendor, cracks were spreading. China's population had exploded, straining resources. Poverty was rampant in the countryside. Corrupt officials extorted the peasantry. Recent disasters piled on the misery. Floods, famines, and epidemics haunted the land. Adding to the turmoil, the Qing had just suffered a humiliating defeat in the First Opium War, 1839–1842, against Britain. The resulting Treaty of Nanjing forced China to open its ports and pay heavy indemnities, eroding the dynasty's prestige. Foreign missionaries now roamed Chinese cities, preaching new religions. Among a proud people long guided by Confucian tradition, disillusion and unrest grew. Many wondered if the Qing had lost the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule. It was in this climate of crisis and despair that a frustrated scholar named Hong Xiuquan emerged. Hong was born in 1814 to a poor Hakka family in the southern province of Guangdong. The Hakka were a marginalized Han Chinese subgroup, often resented by locals and pushed to the hills. Yet Hong's family scraped together money for his education, hoping he could rise as a civil servant. Ambitious and intelligent, Hong set his sights on the imperial examinations, the rigorous tests required to become a government official. Passing these exams was the dream of countless young men. Failure often meant a life of hardship. Hong Xiuquan passed the preliminary exam with ease, raising his family's hopes. But when he traveled to the city of Canton for the higher examinations, he failed, not once, but repeatedly. By 1837, after his third failure, the 23-year-old Hong was left exhausted and broken. Returning home from the examination halls, Hong fell gravely ill. For days he lay bedridden with a high fever, hovering between life and death. In his fevered delirium, Hong experienced vivid visions that would change the course of history. He later described a fantastical dream world. He was carried to a heavenly realm, where a golden-bearded old man lamented that the world was overrun by demons. Hong saw himself wielding a celestial sword, aided by a younger, celestial brother in a great battle to slay these demons. In this cosmic dream, Hong helped defeat the king of hell, purging heaven of evil. The old man in royal robes then gave Hong a new name and anointed him as a divine king on earth. When Hong finally regained consciousness after several days, he astonished his family with wild utterances. He spoke of being the heavenly king, lord of the kingly way, chosen by the Almighty to save China. Villagers whispered that Hong had gone mad. Indeed, from their perspective, he was just a sick, raving scholar who leapt from his bed shouting about demons and justice. Unable to make sense of his dreams, Hong tucked them away in his mind and gradually returned to normal life. He still yearned for success through the exams. In the coming years, he attempted them yet again, only to meet continued failure. Hong's strange vision may have faded temporarily, but fate intervened to resurrect it. In 1843, a few years after his hallucination, Hong finally picked up a booklet that had been given to him during his time in Canton. It was a Christian tract titled Good Words for Exhorting the Age, written by a Chinese convert, Liang Afa. Hong had set it aside before, but now he pored over its pages. The booklet retold biblical stories and preached monotheism, the worship of a single true God. As Hong read, revelation struck. The symbols in the tract aligned with his dream. The old man who had called him son in the heavenly vision must have been God, the Father of the Christians. The helpful younger brother at his side was Jesus Christ. The demons they fought were the false idols and evil of the world. In a moment of epiphany, Hong Xiuquan became convinced that his fever dream had been a divine calling. He was not a failed scholar at all, but the chosen son of God, the younger brother of Jesus, sent to rid China of demons and establish heaven on earth. It was a radical, electrifying idea. At first, Hong shared this revelation cautiously with family and friends. Some were deeply skeptical, even fearful for his sanity. But Hong's charisma and conviction were compelling. He began to preach his new faith, urging people to turn away from idolatry and Qing oppression. He spoke of one true God, whom he called Shangdi in Chinese, and of Jesus as the savior of humankind. According to Hong, God had revealed that the Manchu rulers of Qing China were demons in human form, leading the people astray. He claimed it was his holy mission to destroy the demon Qing and establish a kingdom of peace for the faithful. Hong's message resonated with the downtrodden. Here was hope and purpose for those who had none, peasants, miners, and disaffected scholars alike. If they joined him, they would share in God's promise of a new world, a heavenly kingdoms of great peace. In Chinese, Taiping Tianguo. By the late 1840s, Hong Xiuquan had gathered a core of devoted followers. Together with a close friend, Feng Yunshan, he founded the God Worshippers Society, a secret movement that spread Hong's teachings. They traveled the countryside, distributing pamphlets and hymns, denouncing the Qing as satanic impostors. Many converts came from Hong's own Hakka people, poor migrant communities who were treated as outsiders by the Qing elite. These men and women, despised by local landlords and often living on the margins, found a champion in Hong's egalitarian creed. He preached that all believers were brothers and sisters, equal under God. He urged followers to share property in common, echoing a primitive communism. Idols, ancestral shrines, and the traditional Confucian hierarchy were to be swept away and replaced with pure faith and justice. Such ideas were explosive in rigid, class-bound Qing society. Yet the movement grew quickly. By 1849, there were tens of thousands of God worshippers in several southern provinces, especially in Guangxi, a region long plagued by poverty and banditry. It was in Guangxi's rugged hills that Hong's mission transformed into open rebellion. Local authorities had noticed the swelling congregations of this strange new sect. They scoffed at Hong's blasphemous claim to be a divine kin of Jesus and viewed the God worshippers as a subversive cult. Persecution soon followed. In 1847, Hong and his followers retreated to a stronghold on Thistle Mountain in Guangxi. There, in hidden valleys, thousands gathered to worship the one God and train in secret. They sang hymns, destroyed idols, and prepared for what Hong called the coming war against demons. Charismatic figures among them also reported visionary trances. One peasant, Yang Shuqing, would convulse and speak with a booming voice he claimed was God's. Another, Xiao Chaogui, said he channeled the spirit of Jesus himself. These episodes further galvanized the faithful. They felt heaven was truly guiding them. Hong Xiuquan, at age 36, now embraced his destiny as a prophet king and warlord. He began to refer to himself as the Taiping Wang, the king of great peace. In early 1850, as famine and conflict racked Guangxi, Hong's movement reached a critical mass. Qing soldiers clashed with God worshippers in small skirmishes and arrests. Sensing that the time had come, Hong rallied his followers for all-out insurrection. According to later accounts, he proclaimed that Jesus Christ had urged him to fight for heaven. The God worshippers fashioned crude swords and spears, and even managed to buy muskets and gunpowder from clandestine traders. Men and women drilled in separate units, for Hong had decreed a strict segregation of the sexes to preserve moral purity. By the end of 1850, this peasant army was organized and ready. On January 1, 1851, Hong Xiuquan formally declared rebellion against the Qing dynasty. He announced the founding of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, a new dynasty that would expel the foreign Manchus and restore China to the people. Hong assumed the title of Tianwang, the Heavenly King. In a symbolic rejection of Qing authority, he and his followers cut off their queues, the long braided ponytails that Qing law required men to wear as a sign of loyalty. Now, open revolutionaries, the Taipings, as they came to be called, raised a bright blue flag emblazoned with the words, Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace. Under this banner, they won their first victory at a place called Jintian in Guangxi, ambushing imperial troops sent to arrest them. News of the victory spread like wildfire. Thousands more volunteers flocked to join Hong's cause, bringing whatever weapons they could. By late 1851, the Taiping army swelled to perhaps 50,000 strong, a mix of poor farmers, miners, disaffected villagers, and even some minor scholars. What they lacked in formal military training they made up for with zeal and discipline. Hong instituted a code of conduct. Loot was held in common, opium and alcohol. were banned, and any soldier who raped or pillaged was executed. This harsh morality distinguished the Taipings from ordinary bandits and won them further support among victims of lawless chaos. The Qing court in Beijing, initially dismissive of the southern barbarian cult, was now alarmed. Officials labeled Hong Xiuquan a traitor and sorcerer. Imperial forces converged to crush the uprising, but to the Qing's astonishment, the rebels kept winning. In battle after battle, the Taiping troops, including women warriors, proved fiercely determined. Many fought with the conviction that God was on their side, making them fearless even under musket fire. In September 1851, Hong's forces captured the walled city of Yong'an in Guangxi, defeating several Qing offensives against it. Encouraged by this success, Hong began to style his nascent regime like a dynasty. He appointed his most trusted lieutenants as kings under him. Yang Shuqing became the East King, Xiao Chaogui, the West King, Feng Yunshan, Hong's old friend, the South King, Wei Changhui, the North King, and later Shida Kai, the Wing King. These men formed an inner circle to help govern and lead armies. Hong also awarded titles to his own family members, elevating siblings and relatives to noble rank, a hint of the monarchy he envisioned. By 1852, the Taiping Rebellion had burst out of Guangxi and spread into neighboring provinces. Hong Xiuquan led his ever-growing host on a long march northward. They swept through Hunan province, gathering recruits and weapons. Qing garrisons fell or fled before them. The Taiping army moved with surprising speed, often covering dozens of miles a day across difficult terrain. When they ran low on supplies, they lived off the land, and their promise of land for the landless convinced many impoverished villagers to welcome or join them. Along their route, the Taipings would often distribute captured grain to the poor and hold mass baptisms, solidifying local support. Still, not everyone embraced these strange rebels. Some scholars and landlords saw them as dangerous heretics and helped Qing forces resist. In the autumn of 1852, the Taipings laid siege to Changsha, a major city in Hunan. There, for the first time, they met stiff resistance. Changsha's walls held firm, and Hong was unable to take the city. Rather than waste time, the Taiping army bypassed Changsha and pushed east, aiming for the heart of the Qing realm, the Yangtze River Valley. By early 1853, the rebels had reached the mighty Yangtze, China's longest river and the empire's central artery. Seizing boats, the Taipings boldly surged downriver. City after city along the Yangtze fell to them. In quick succession, they captured Wuchang, Hankou, and Hanyang, the three towns that would later form the great city of Wuhan. The Qing provincial armies, poorly led and demoralized, retreated or surrendered. With each victory, the Taiping ranks swelled further. Now not just peasants, but also boatmen, laborers, even some deserters from the Qing military came over to the Heavenly Kingdom's side. Hong's forces, now armed with captured cannons and modern rifles, were becoming a formidable fighting machine. Observers noted the peculiar sight of Taiping soldiers marching into battle singing hymns, convinced that angels fought with them. Their discipline under fire contrasted sharply with the often disorganized imperial troops. In March 1853, the Taiping army reached Nanjing, the historic city that had once been China's capital in past dynasties. Nanjing was a jewel of the south, strategically and symbolically important. Its fall would be a devastating blow to Qing authority, and Hong knew it. The city was defended by a garrison of Manchu bannermen, elite Qing troops fiercely loyal to the emperor. A siege commenced. Taiping cannons pounded Nanjing's walls for days. On March 10, 1853, the defenses finally gave way. What followed was a bloody climax that stunned the nation. Imagine the scene. Taiping warriors storm through the shattered gates of Nanjing, shouting praises to God and victory. Many wear red or blue turbans inscribed with the words, Heavenly Kingdom. The Manchu defenders, realizing the city is lost, fight with desperate fury, refusing to surrender. In a final act of defiance, groups of Manchu soldiers and their families commit mass suicide, some by setting fire to their quarters, others by throwing themselves into wells. The Taipings, driven by years of hatred for their demon oppressors, massacre those Manchus who do not kill themselves. The streets run red with blood. Ancient buildings, including the Qing governor's palace, are looted and set aflame. Thick black smoke coils into the sky above Nanjing's Ming'era walls. By nightfall, Nanjing has fallen. The victorious rebels exult in what they see as a sign of heaven's mandate. One of the Qing Empire's greatest cities is now in their hands. Hong Xiuquan made Nanjing the capital of his heavenly kingdom, renaming it Tianjing, the heavenly capital. With this triumph, the Taiping Rebellion reached its high water mark. Hong's domain now covered much of the fertile Yangtze River heartland. By his own claim, he now ruled millions of subjects across several provinces. Foreigners living in China took note. Some Western missionaries even wondered if a Christian revolution was underway in the world's most populous nation. The Qing court, meanwhile, was thrown into panic. The young Emperor Xianfeng reportedly burst into tears when news of Nanjing's fall reached Beijing. The emperor's own father had once governed Nanjing. Now that city was lost to a self-proclaimed son of God. Across the empire, local officials either doubled down on resistance or quietly hedged their bets, unsure if the Qing would survive this inferno. Inside Nanjing, Hong Xiuquan set about organizing a new government. He and his top lieutenants occupied the former mansions of Qing officials, transforming them into palaces for the heavenly kingdom. Hong took one grand residence for himself and had it redesigned as his heavenly king's palace. He withdrew into a life of semi-seclusion, ruling through proclamations and religious decrees. Charismatic and visionary as Hong was, he lacked experience in administration, so he delegated many practical matters to others, especially to the East King, Yang Xiuqing, who became his effective prime minister. Under Taiping rule, Nanjing society underwent radical change. The Taipings declared that men and women were equal under God. They outlawed practices like foot binding, the painful custom of binding women's feet, and banned prostitution, gambling, alcohol, and opium smoking. They also discouraged the Confucian veneration of ancestors, and traditional temples were smashed or converted into churches for worshipping Shangdi. To many ordinary Chinese, these were shocking, bewildering changes. Some appreciated the Puritan ethic. Crime and vice were said to diminish in Taiping-held areas, and the poor liked hearing that land would be divided equally. But scholars and officials were outraged by Taiping anti-Confucianism. The educated gentry saw Hong's movement as a nihilistic cult tearing apart the moral order of family, tradition, and emperor that had guided China for millennia. As a result, most of the scholar official class, even those who hated the Manchus, refused to join the Taipings. This would prove crucial. The rebels alienated China's natural local leaders, the gentry, who instead largely sided with the Qing to suppress the heretics. Nevertheless, at first the heavenly kingdom thrived in Nanjing. The Taiping leaders issued proclamations outlining an ambitious program of reforms. They spoke of abolishing the old exam system and creating a new righteous bureaucracy under God's law. They drafted plans for fair land distribution. Each family, rich or poor, was to till the same amount of soil under a system called the Land Sharing Program. In theory, it was an attempt at utopian equality. Land would be allocated by household size and needs, not by inheritance or wealth. The Taipings also simplified the Chinese written language in their documents and printed Bibles and tracts to spread their faith. On the surface, the heavenly capital brimmed with idealism about building a just society. Western observers in Shanghai heard reports that the Taiping forbade torture and promoted honest officials, in contrast to the notoriously corrupt Qing. If this new order had succeeded, it might have dramatically altered China's path. But the Taiping dream was soon tested by harsh realities. After capturing Nanjing in 1853, Hong Xiuquan faced a fateful choice. Should his armies press on to destroy the Qing regime once and for all, or consolidate their gains? Hong chose to halt further major offensives and fortify his kingdom. He sent out 2 large expeditionary forces that year, one headed north toward Beijing, the other west into the upper Yangtze Valley, but he himself remained in Nanjing to govern. This decision proved a turning point. The northern expedition marched hundreds of miles from Nanjing with the daring goal of seizing Beijing, the Qing capital. At first, it met little resistance, cutting through the plains of Anhui, Henan, and into Zhili, the region of Beijing. By late 1853, the Taiping vanguard came within perhaps 100 miles of Beijing. Panic swept the imperial court. The Emperor Xianfeng reportedly prepared treasures for evacuation and sent word to muster all available troops from Manchuria and Mongolia to defend the capital. The Qing government was nearly paralyzed with fear, for if Beijing fell, the dynasty would likely collapse. Yet, the heavenly kingdom's reach exceeded its grasp. The Taiping Northern Army, mostly Southerners unused to the cold climate, stretched its supply lines to the breaking point. Instead of attacking Beijing directly, the Taiping commanders hesitated and veered toward the secondary city of Tianjin. This delay proved fatal. Qing forces, led by experienced Manchu generals and bolstered by Mongol cavalry, caught up with the rebels. Overextended and low on provisions, the Taiping Northern Expedition was gradually encircled and destroyed by early 1855. Only scattered survivors made it back to Nanjing. The Qing capital had narrowly escaped, and the momentum of Hong's revolution was blunted. The failure to capture Beijing was a decisive missed opportunity. After that, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom would never again come so close to toppling the Qing outright. Meanwhile, another Taiping force struck westward in hopes of spreading the rebellion into China's interior. This western expedition scored some victories, seizing towns along the upper Yangtze and seeking to link up with other discontented groups, like local bandits and the Nian rebels in the north. For a time, the Taipings even forged a loose alliance with the Nian, another rebellion that had sprung up in northern China, hoping to squeeze the Qing from two sides. But coordination was difficult across such distances. The western expedition eventually stalled as well. Back in Nanjing, the unity of the Taiping leadership began to fray. Hong Xiuquan increasingly withdrew into his spiritual role, composing poems, hymns, and religious instructions. He rarely met his ministers in person, often communicating via written edicts from behind palace walls. He seemed to believe firmly that God's favor alone would sustain the heavenly kingdom. Hong took to living in luxurious seclusion, attended by a large harem of women, despite earlier Taiping rules against polygamy, a sign of double standards emerging. Administrative burden and military planning fell more and more to others, especially Yang Xuqing, the East King. Yang was a former woodcutter with a sharp mind and an iron will. After Nanjing was secured, he organized the civil government, took charge of supplies, and often issued orders in the name of the Heavenly Father during his prophetic trances. Over time, Yang Xuqing's power in Nanjing grew to rival Hong's own. By 1856, simmering tensions at the top exploded into deadly internal conflict, an event known as the Tianjin Incident. The ambitious Yang Xuqing, perhaps believing his administrative successes entitled him to greater authority, reportedly demanded that Hong Xiuquan yield to one of his pronouncements from God. According to some accounts, Yang, while speaking as the voice of God during a trance, hinted that Hong should step aside and rest, implying that Yang should assume more control. This was a direct challenge to Hong's status as divine king. The heavenly king was furious and frightened. Was his most powerful lieutenant plotting a coup? Hong turned to his other loyal comrades for support. That autumn, Hong Xiuquan secretly instructed the North King, Wei Changhui, and the brave young Wing King, Shida Kai, to eliminate Yang. They laid a trap. Yang Xuqing was invited to a banquet in the palace. There, Hong's guards suddenly set upon Yang and his entourage. The East King and his family were brutally murdered inside the heavenly capital. Over the next days, thousands of Yang's followers and adherents were hunted down and slain in Nanjing. Blood flowed in the very streets the Taipings had vowed to make a new holy city. The purge did not end with Yang's death. In the volatile aftermath, suspicions ran high among the Taiping elite. Not long after Yang Xuqing's execution, Hong Xiuquan turned on Wei Changhui, the North King, the very man he had ordered to kill Yang. Wei was a fierce warrior who had helped conquer Nanjing, but Hong feared his loyalty and arrogance. Hong had Wei Changhui executed as well, eliminating another potential rival. This spiral of paranoia deeply alarmed the last remaining great general, Shida Kai, Wing King. Shida Kai had been one of Hong's most talented military commanders, adored by the troops for his courage and tactical skill. Now he saw that even top Taiping leaders could be cut down on a whim. Fearing he'd be next, Shida Kai gathered his loyal soldiers and abandoned Nanjing in 1857, hoping to continue the fight against the Qing on his own terms. He roamed southwest China for several years, but without sufficient support, Shida Kai's forces were eventually cornered. In 1863, Shida Kai surrendered to the Qing to save his followers from annihilation. He was executed, tragically ending the life of one of the rebellion's noblest figures. The consequences of the Taiping inner turmoil were disastrous. The heavenly kingdom had effectively decapitated itself. Hong Xiuquan remained as the supreme leader, but his circle of capable lieutenants was gone. A once unified revolutionary. Leadership devolved into suspicion and ineptitude. Hong entrusted many duties to his own family members, his brothers and other relatives, who often lacked talent or experience. Governance and military coordination suffered. The morale of Taiping armies dropped as they heard of the deadly feuds in Nanjing. Some soldiers even drifted away, disillusioned that the heavenly kingdom was not so heavenly after all. While the Taipings were weakened by division, the Qing dynasty was slowly mustering a powerful response. Early in the rebellion, the Qing imperial armies, the Eight Banners and Green Standard troops, had fared poorly against the Taipings. Many of the banner soldiers were out of shape or complacent after years of easy posts. They often retreated in disarray when faced with the fanatical rebels. Recognizing this, a few far-sighted Qing officials took a new approach. They began raising regional militias made up of local villagers and gentry who had a personal stake in restoring order. Foremost among these officials was Zheng Guofan, a Confucian scholar from Hunan province. In 1853, as the Taipings threatened Hunan, Zheng Guofan was given imperial sanction to organize a Hunanese army. He recruited local farmers, miners, and landlords, instilling in them a sense of duty to protect their homeland and the Confucian way of life from the blasphemous Taiping. Zheng financed and trained these troops with help from local gentry, effectively creating a private provincial army loyal to him, but fighting on behalf of the Qing. This Shang army, named after the Jiang River in Hunan, drilled rigorously, learned modern artillery techniques, and was held together by Zheng's stern discipline and personal leadership. In battle, Zheng Guofan's forces showed tenacity and cohesion that Qing regulars lacked. They gradually pushed the Taipings out of Hunan. By 1854, Zheng Guofan had turned the tide in that region and began advancing down the Yangtze, city by city. Other local leaders followed Zheng's model. In Anhui province, a rising star named Li Hongzhang formed the Huai army, while in Zhejiang and Fujian provinces, Zuo Zongtang raised yet another regional militia. These Yongying, brave camp armies as they were called, were a decentralizing shift in Chinese warfare. The Qing court had little choice but to rely on these semi-autonomous forces, since its own central troops had proven inadequate. Ironically, to save the dynasty, the emperors had to empower men like Zheng and Li, effectively warlords, who commanded personal loyalty from their troops. It was a dangerous bargain for the future, but in the short term, it began to choke off the Taiping revolt. By 1858–59, the Taiping territories were shrinking under the Qing counterattack. The once expanding Heavenly Kingdom was on the defensive. To make matters worse, a new external threat had emerged. The Second Opium War erupted in 1856, pitting the Qing against Britain and France. For several years, the Qing government had to fight the European powers along the coast, even as it battled the Taipings in the interior. Initially, this two-front crisis inadvertently aided the Taipings. Qing attention and troops were diverted to confronting the British and French, who in 1860 marched on Beijing and burned the emperor's summer palace. The beleaguered Qing even briefly considered allying with the Taipings against the foreigners, but Hong Xiuquan's regime was ideologically hostile to the West's presence too. In fact, Hong had sent letters to Christian missionaries and Western officials, framing his rebellion as a kind of righteous movement that Western Christians should support. For a time, there was ambiguity. Some Western missionaries were sympathetic to the Taipings, intrigued by their use of the Bible and talk of Jesus. Could this peasant rebellion actually be a Christian revolution that Europe might back? Ultimately, however, the Taiping version of Christianity diverged greatly from Western norms, and the rebels proved unwilling to grant trade or commercial concessions that the British Empire wanted. By 1860, after forcing favorable treaties from the Qing, the Western powers decided that the status quo, a weakened but intact Qing government, was preferable to a radical religious regime in Nanjing that they did not understand. When Taiping forces moved to threaten Shanghai in 1860, Western alarm bells rang. Shanghai was a thriving treaty port where British, French, American, and other foreigners lived and traded under treaty protections. The prospect of Taiping armies looting Shanghai's wealth and potentially harming foreigners spurred the Europeans into action. In early 1862, British and French troops, fresh from victory in Beijing, joined Qing forces to defend Shanghai from the advancing Taipings. Modern Western cannons and naval gunboats shelled the rebels, who, for the first time, faced an enemy with firepower far superior to their own. The Taiping troops, brave but poorly equipped, were repulsed from Shanghai with heavy losses. The foreigners' stance was now clear. They would assist the Qing in putting down the rebellion. A key element of this foreign aid was the creation of the so-called ever-victorious army, a small elite force of Chinese soldiers led by foreign mercenary officers. An American adventurer, Frederick Townsend Ward, first organized this mercenary force in 1860, training Chinese locals around Shanghai in Western drill and tactics. After Ward's death in battle, command passed to a British officer, Major Charles George Chinese Gordon. Under Gordon's leadership, the ever-victorious army, never more than a few thousand strong, became a potent strike force that worked alongside Li Hongzhang's troops. They wore smart uniforms, carried modern rifles, and moved rapidly on steamships through the canals and rivers. In engagement after engagement, Gordon's troops outmaneuvered and outgunned the larger but less coordinated Taiping units. By 1863, the ever-victorious army and Qing forces systematically retook the rich cities of the Yangtze Delta from the rebels. One by one, Taiping strongholds fell. Suzhou, an ancient commercial hub, was recaptured after Gordon negotiated a truce, only to see surrendered Taiping commanders executed by Li Hongzhang, an act that briefly enraged Gordon. Hangzhou, the great city by the West Lake, was also seized by Qing forces led by Zuo Zongtang, ending Taiping control in Zhejiang province. The Heavenly Kingdom was being carved apart. By 1864, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom was crumbling. Hong Xiuquan's realm, once sprawling over half of China's south, had been reduced essentially to Nanjing and its immediate surroundings. Yet Hong Xiuquan did not surrender or flee. His faith in divine deliverance remained unshaken. As Qing noose tightened around Nanjing, conditions inside the heavenly capital grew dire. The city was swollen with refugees from lost Taiping territories, loyal believers who had fled ahead of the Qing armies to make a last stand with their heavenly king. Food ran desperately short. By spring 1864, Nanjing was under full siege by Qing forces led by Zheng Guofan's brother Zheng Guoquan encamped outside the walls. Constant bombardment shook the city. Starvation and disease set in among the civilians and remaining soldiers. Hong Xiuquan, now 50 years old, spent his days in prayer and writing, awaiting a miracle. He reassured his followers that God would not abandon them, that some heavenly intervention or internal uprising in the Qing camp would yet save the heavenly kingdom. However, as people in Nanjing began collapsing from hunger, even Hong's most ardent faithful grew concerned. One of Hong's last surviving generals, Li Xucheng, known as the Loyal King, tried to organize the defense and care for the populace. Li Xucheng had been a peasant who rose through Taiping ranks by sheer bravery and skill. By the final year, he was effectively the chief military commander in Nanjing. Seeing the misery around him, Li urged Hong Xiuquan to let civilians break out and flee the city to avoid the coming slaughter. Hong refused. Admitting defeat or allowing his flock to scatter would mean losing faith in God's promise. Instead, Hong issued a bizarre edict. He told the starving people to collect wild herbs and weeds, manna from heaven, which he called sweet dew, to fill their stomachs. Dutifully, Hong himself gathered weeds in the palace gardens and cooked them into balls, attempting to eat this bitter foraged food. Unsurprisingly, it provided little sustenance. By June 1864, Hong Xiuquan fell gravely ill, likely weakened by months of malnutrition and stress. Some accounts suggest he may have intentionally poisoned himself, while others say the wild vegetables he ate were toxic. On June 1, 1864, Hong Xiuquan died. Inside his heavenly palace, still proclaiming mystical confidence in ultimate victory. In a final gesture, he named his young teenage son, Hong Tianguifu, as the new heavenly king. But a boy could do nothing to save the doomed rebellion. Hong Xiuquan's death was kept secret for a time to preserve morale, but there was little morale left to save. A few weeks later, on July 19, 1864, the Qing armies launched their final assault on Nanjing. After months of pounding, they had breached a portion of the city wall using tunnels packed with explosives. Qing bannermen and Hunanese soldiers swarmed through the gap, shouting triumphantly and eager for vengeance. What followed was utter carnage. The Taiping defenders, already famished and greatly outnumbered, resisted as fiercely as they could. Many refused to surrender, fighting to the death for their faith in Hong's vision. Some groups of devotees with no way out committed mass suicide, setting fire to gunpowder stores or leaping from towers rather than be captured. Qing soldiers showed no mercy to those who survived. Nanjing was sacked without restraint. Victorious troops went on an orgy of killing and looting. Men, women, even children were butchered indiscriminately in revenge for the long rebellion. According to an eyewitness account by the Qing general Zheng Guoquan, the slaughter was horrifying even to him. Children and toddlers, he wrote in a letter, some not even 2 years old, had been hacked up or run through just for sport. The streets were littered with corpses. Fires raged across the city. The once magnificent capital of the Heavenly Kingdom was turned into a charnel house. The teenage pretender Hong Tianguifu was quickly found and captured. He would be executed the next year, along with any Taiping royal family members the Qing could hunt down. So fell the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. 13 years of rebellion ended in blood and ashes. In the aftermath, the Qing victors displayed the severed heads of Taiping princes and generals on the walls of Nanjing to warn any other would-be rebels. One of the last Taiping leaders, the loyal King Li Shucheng, was captured alive a few days after the city's fall. After giving a lengthy written confession of the rebellion's history and his role, which the Qing edited heavily for propaganda, Li Shucheng was executed by sword, thus silencing one of the only voices that might have told the Taiping story from the other side. Scattered bands of Taiping followers tried to fight on in the hinterlands. A rump force under a Taiping prince held out in remote parts of Guangdong and Guangxi until 1866, but they were eventually crushed. The dream of the heavenly kingdom of great peace was extinguished. The cost of this civil war was staggering. In the 14 years of conflict, huge swaths of central and southern China were laid waste. Some historians estimate at least 20 million people died, not only in battle but also from the famine and disease that accompanied the warfare. Some estimates run far higher, up to 30 million or more, when considering how many civilians were never accounted for. Entire counties were depopulated, fields lay untilled, cities that had flourished for centuries were reduced to rubble and ghost towns. The Yangtze River Valley, once the empire's rice bowl, had witnessed terrible devastation. Refugees by the millions wandered in search of food and shelter, many never returning to their ancestral homes. In sheer numbers, the Taiping Rebellion was as destructive as World War I, yet it remains less known to the world, a stark testament to the scale of China's historical tragedies. For the Qing dynasty, victory came at a heavy price. The Manchu-led regime survived the Taiping uprising, but it was gravely weakened and fundamentally changed. Never again would the Qing enjoy unquestioned control over China. To defeat the Taipings, the imperial court had decentralized power, relying on regional strongmen like Zheng Guofan and Lei Hongzhang. These men emerged from the war with tremendous prestige, their own loyal armies, and semi-autonomous authority in their regions. The Qing central government, bankrupt and drained, had to grant more leeway to provincial officials to tax and administer locally. In effect, the Taiping Rebellion planted the seeds for warlordism, which would plague China after the Qing eventually fell. Yet, in the immediate decades after the war, leaders like Zheng and Li also became champions of reform, launching the self-strengthening movement to modernize China's military and industry, hoping to prevent future uprisings and resist foreign imperialism. They built arsenals, shipyards, and schools, trying to rejuvenate the ailing dynasty. Some of these efforts had success, but they were not enough to fully revive Qing fortunes. The social and ideological impact of the Taiping Rebellion cut deep. The rebellion had been ostensibly fought to bring about an era of peace, equality, and divine justice. It failed, but it introduced ideas that would echo in later movements. Hong Xiuquan's promises of shared land, public welfare, and an end to corrupt elites resonated with the poor long after his kingdom was gone. In the early 20th century, Chinese revolutionaries looked back to the Taiping as a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration. The Republican leader Sun Yat-sen, who led the 1911 revolution that finally overthrew the Qing, praised the Taipings as heroic pioneers who had tried to expel the Manchu oppressors, essentially forefathers of the Chinese Revolution. Decades later, Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communists would also invoke the Taiping Rebellion in their narrative of peasant rebellion against feudalism, though they criticized its religious mysticism. While Hong Xiuquan's peculiar brand of Christianity did not take root, the notion of a Chinese populace rising up for a more just and equal society did take hold. The Taiping Rebellion thus occupies an ambiguous place in history. It was a frightening cataclysm that caused untold suffering, but it also revealed the depth of China's internal crises and the yearning of its people for fundamental change. Above all, the Taiping Rebellion stands as a human drama of immense scale, a clash of fervent belief against established order. It was a war fueled by visions of heaven and carried out with very earthly brutality. In its wake, the Qing dynasty staggered on for a few more decades, its power hollowed out, its decline irreversible. The land it ruled had been scarred by a nightmare in pursuit of a dream. Hong Xiuquan, the humble scholar who believed himself God's son, had aimed to build a heavenly kingdom on earth. Instead, he unleashed a hellish conflagration. Yet even in failure, his rebellion forced China to begin rethinking and rebuilding, setting the stage for the great transformations of the 20th century. In the end, the Taiping Rebellion is remembered with a mix of sorrow and awe. Sorrow for the rivers of blood spilled and the generations lost. awe for the sheer scale of popular fervor that challenged an empire. It began in the mind of one man who dreamt of slaying demons, and it grew into a tempest that nearly swept the Dragon Throne into oblivion. The story of the Taipings is a potent reminder of how profound social despair, fused with messianic vision, can erupt and change the course of history. From the broken walls of Nanjing in 1864, one can still imagine the ghosts of that heavenly kingdom, flickering between tragedy and hope, their voices echoing a final prayer for the peace that eluded them.